And welcome to Hydroclimate2k. I'm Georgie Foster, and together with Matt Jones, I co-lead the project with support from all of our wonderful archive leads. So this video is to give you just a little introduction to the project and show you the ropes with our shared project folder before you dive in. So first, what is Hydroclimate2k? So in essence, what it'll be is a highly curated database of hydroclimate proxy records for the Common Era. So that's records that are already published and also pass a particular set of criteria for inclusion in our database. The database is in lipid or linked paleodata format, which is a data format designed specifically for paleoclimate data. And it lets us attach sort of tags, which we call metadata, to each record that we include that describe in machine readable terms how the author of a particular data set said that they intend for that data to be interpreted. And the two really important metadata fields that we've designed, the community's come up with for Hydroclimate2k are first the environment interpretation, which is like the specific environmental variable that a proxy records. And second is the climate interpretation. And so that's the hydroclimate variable that the environmental variable responds to. And so in many cases, that will be something like precipitation amount or the ratio of precipitation to evaporation. Now, you may or may not know that there are actually some other similar paleoclimate databases out there in lipid format. So things like ISO2k, Coral Hydro 2k, Sisal is now in lipid as well. And so all records that are in those databases already exist in the lipidverse, which, yes, is the actual term for the sort of online repository where all lipid files live. And so many of those we'll actually be able to include in our database too, as long as they pass our particular criteria for inclusion. And we'll also need to add in our metadata tags. So more on that in a moment. But of course, there are also many published Common Era hydroclimate records out there that are not yet in the lipid format. So we want to gather those up as well. So the database compilation is essentially going to happen in 3 stages. So we're not starting from scratch because there are hundreds actually of candidate records inherited from other lipid databases, so like ISO2k and Coral Hydro 2k. And these will need to be screened to check whether they should be included in Hydroclimate2k as well. And so these are the majority of the records that are currently in our QC sheet. Second stage is finding new records that aren't yet in lipid format, converting them to lipid, and then adding them into the database. The third stage is adding our specific interpretation metadata to all of the records in the database and then marking them with a flag to say, yep, I want this proxy record to be considered part of the database. What this involves practically is sort of going through the paper associated with a record and distilling down the author's interpretations into our interpretation metadata fields. So that environment interpretation and the climate interpretation and the supporting fields. So things like seasonality and so forth. Because one of the things that we really want to make sure of with this database is that we minimize the risk of people sort of misusing or misinterpreting published data sets, particularly given hydroclimate, of course, is very complicated, and particular proxy variables can often have quite specific interpretations. So we want to capture that in the database as best we can. To do all of this, we're working in archive teams. So that's groups of people with expertise in a particular paleoclimate archive, tree wood or corals or lake sediments, documentary records, whatever. And that's so you have people to ask if you have a tricky metadata question, when you're going through the paper and you're not quite sure. And also the sort of assuming that you're maybe relatively familiar with the literature, although of course it is fine if you are not, if you're a first year PhD student or whatever. Okay, so all the archive teams are working together in a shared folder, which is on Google Drive. I'm just going to share my screen so you can see that. Okay, it is. So the let's see. So the very first thing that you should do now that you're keen to join the project is to email me to request access to this Google Drive. The second thing that you should do as soon as you get access is to head straight to the project members contact sheet to add your email address. And if you don't do this, then you won't get any of the project emails. So where to find that? We have a folder here called admin, including contact details. In there, we have this sheet called Hydroclimate2k active member contact details. And so in here is the names of all the people signed up and their email addresses. So this is what we use to send emails to the group. Okay, so communication will mostly be via email, but we also actually have a Substack, which is a blog essentially, where Matt or I will periodically add sort of helpful tips. It looks like this. And so those are all there, they're permanent and searchable. And so this will be a really good resource if you find yourself getting stuck with something. We've actually just set this up very recently, so there's only a few entries, but you can already see a few of those here, and there will be many more added as well. Okay. Now, what next? Okay, so once you have access to the our project drive, looks like this, you'll see everything here. So this is the top level of our project drive, which has some extremely important and useful documents and guides. And those are sort of here, not in folders, just in the top level. So here, for example, here we have our all-important criteria for dataset inclusion in the database. And so this is something you'll probably refer to quite a bit. And so these are the criteria that a record has to pass if it's included in the Hydroclimate2k database. So first, and very important, is that the record has been interpreted by the author or in a latter publication as reflecting hydroclimate primarily. There might be some sort of details, some sort of complications around this relevant to particular archives, but the main thing is that we want this to be a hydroclimate record, not temperature or something else. The second is related to the temporal resolution, and that is that records have to have data in at least 50 unique years within the Common Era. So for records that are annually resolved or less than annually resolved, that would just be 50 data points. For records with sub-annual resolution, so for example, corals, it might be more than 50 samples. So for example, if it's, biannual, then there would have to be 100 samples-ish to have 50 unique years in the Common Era. Again, there's a little bit of wiggle room there. Like if we had a record that didn't quite hit this, but it was in a location where we have very little paleoclimate data or some really cool proxy, then that would be okay. But it's the guideline. There's on here that the records should be sort of site specific or sort of region specific. And the final is one about the chronological control. So if it's an annually banded archive, then it should be cross-dated or layer counted. If it's not annually banded, then it has to have a certain degree of radiometric age control. Okay, so you can refer to that as and when you need. There are also a few other things here. Let's see. So here's another really useful sort of a dictionary, essentially, which contains the definitions for each field in our QC sheet. You almost certainly won't know at this stage what a QC sheet is, but there's actually a blog post dedicated to that in the Hydroclimate 2k Substack. Essentially, so you can go and read that, but it's our tool that we use to add metadata to a record that's in the lipid format. So if you have a look here, you can see these are the various metadata field names. Like here's the environment interpretation, the climate interpretation, and then here are the definitions that describe what exactly you should go into those fields. In here, let's see what else. We've got guidelines, so written guidelines for adding a new record to the data set, or for assessing a record inherited from a previous compilation. There are also YouTube tutorials for these if you're somebody who prefers to watch than read. So Hydroclimate2k actually we have a YouTube channel where there's various sort of videos, helper videos, guides. So feel free to watch those if you like. We'll come back to them later. And there are a few other bits and pieces here, so just feel free to have a poke around. Okay, so otherwise, from now, you'll probably be spending most of your time with your archive leaders. So they'll be your first port of call when you have questions. Me and Matt meet regularly with the archive leaders so we can discuss how everybody is getting on and answer any questions that have come up in your regular archive group meetings. If you don't know who your archive leads are, you can find their names here, again, in the same admin folder where you went to add your details. There's this other sheet, which is the contact details for the archive leads. So here they are. You'll be able to find who you should email about your particular archive. But of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me and Matt as well. There is no such thing as a silly question here. I absolutely understand that it can seem maybe a bit daunting when you're just learning the ropes. So you should never be shy about asking for help or clarification or anything. Okay, so that's that. That's your little whistle-stop tour of the project. It's wonderful to have you, and hopefully I will see you at a project meeting sometime soon.